I know coming out of the Stanley Cup Final, everyone thinks they know the elephant in the room. Well, actually, that would just be the Oilers goaltending. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we talk about how realistic is it for the Oilers to upgrade in net.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. Just wrapped up my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network. I could not be happier to be here. I am so grateful and thankful to everyone who has made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, where if you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk all things goaltending. We are going to start laying out the facts of the case, what Pickard and Skinner's numbers are, what they mean, and what the Oilers need. Our second segment, we'll talk about what I expect the Oilers to do as far as goalie. And then in our final segment, I'll give you some ideas as to who's available out there in the goalie market. Hint, it's kind of uninspiring. So, I have been doing hockey content for a while. I have been writing, podcasting, short form video, whatever type of content you can think of. I've done it in some shape or form for better part of 10 years now. Since I got to college as a freshman, I'm 28 years old now, and I have been doing hockey content for a long time. And generally speaking, I like to think I am getting a better understanding of the game, where it's going as I'm getting older. I have more resources, I have more experience to draw upon, more understanding. But goaltending is not of science. It is not of fact. Goaltending is the closest you're going to get to magic and the abstract in the world of professional sports. It is such a high variance position. It is arguably the most high variance position in all of sports, more so than goalie and any other sports with a goalie, because of hockey's volatility. So, for example, I want you to think about a given sequence. Let's say a team dumps the puck in from the neutral zone to the offensive zone. The forechecker wins that puck. They win the foot race from that defenseman. They pass it once up the wall to either a winger or a pinching defenseman. That defenseman passes it laterally across the blue line to a defenseman at the other point. That defenseman's going to send it along the boards down below the goal line. It's going to go below the goal line. Someone behind the goal line is going to keep moving it along. And eventually, after a number of passes, 5, 6, 7, 8, somebody is going to take a shot. Whether that shot has a clean line of sight, whether the goalie is in the right position, whether the puck gets tipped on the way in or bounces off of something on the way in, what I have just listed to you are variables. And that's why hockey is so high variance. The more variables you introduce to a situation, the more unlikely it is you're going to be able to repeat the same outcome. So, for example, if you flip a coin, you can either get heads or tails. If you roll a die, you can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you roll 2 die, you can get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you can get 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, in addition to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get what I'm saying here. The more variables you introduce, the harder it is to replicate. And hockey, every sequence is different. Every single sequence is different. And you might say, well, Nick, sets in basketball, plays in football, pitches in baseball. Yes, they are. But hockey has more of them in every given sequence, in every given scoring play. The other sports don't have, 120, 150 plays within a given sequence before a goal. You could go a whole game, a whole 60 minutes of regulation without scoring. And I know that happens from time to time in the other sports, but in hockey, because there are so many inputs, it makes a goalie's job really difficult. And we know, based on Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner's respective track records, where they're at in the hierarchy of goalies. And generally speaking, and we're going to address this more later on, goalies that have enough do not change teams. Teams that are good or even just average or even slightly bad, if they have a goalie they feel good about, they're going to hold on to them and try and wait until they're competitive again because it's so difficult to find a quality one. And that's kind of where I think the Oilers are at. I think they are in the Derek Carr boat of quarterbacks, where Derek Carr is not good. Yeah, I know Derek Carr announced his retirement from football, but Derek Carr had one or two exciting seasons, threw for a lot of yards. He was an MVP candidate one time on a Raiders team that was pretty good, that made the playoffs in like 2016 or 17. But by and large, a very meh quarterback, never really elevated above his environment, was very situation dependent. And because of that, they have been in a position where you don't want to go and try and find someone better and risk losing that baseline level of slightly below average, because it's so hard to find someone who is even average. And in the regular season, Skinner and Pickard's combined save percentage of .894 was 1/1000th% better than what it was in the regular season. Excuse me, what the league average was in the regular season. The NHL average was .893. Skinner and Pickard combined for .894. I didn't throw Olivier Rodriguez's relief appearance in there, his one start in there, because it didn't merit inclusion, didn't want to be unfair to Skinner and Pickard. But in the playoffs, they weren't competitive. The worst goalie tandem in terms of save percentage to make the Stanley Cup Final in the salary cap era. We're talking about a tandem that had 3 goals saved above expected in the playoffs for the whole playoffs, and most of that was Skinner in the Dallas series, pitching the 2 consecutive shutouts, coming off of the Vegas series where he had 1 or 2 nice games. And look, I think Skinner has really been unfairly boxed in. I think they have been put in a position where they are being asked to do more than they are capable of. And I don't want to fault guys for that, because Pickard and Skinner have overachieved relative to their talent. And that's a good outcome. You know, you think about where Stuart Skinner was in his development when he took the net from Jack Campbell a couple years ago. This was somebody with no NHL experience whatsoever, was an all-star as a rookie, has been various points of competent in the playoffs. And that's not enough. It's just not enough. And you look at the contemporary NHL and what the expectations are as far as Stanley Cup caliber goalie. You don't need to be Sergei Bobrovsky, Andrei Vasilevsky, Igor Shesterkin, UC Saros. You don't need to be elite. You go and look, Darcy Kemper's numbers when the Avalanche won, pretty mediocre. Jordan Binnington's number was when the Blues won. They're okay. They're nothing remarkable. But there was a certain baseline level of competency there that gives the rest of your team confidence. And right now, you can tell the rest of the team in the way they play does not have a ton of confidence, no matter what they say. And look, you can like the guys. I'm not saying you can't like Stuart Skinner or Calvin Pickard, especially if they're on your team. You know, you respect them for the craft of goaltending. It's not easy. It's really difficult. But at the same time, the Oilers play tighter in front of Skinner. They struggle to move the puck. They give up fewer chances against Pickard because they are playing a little bit tighter. They are playing a little bit better defensively. And he didn't really reward them for that in the playoffs, especially in the Stanley Cup Final. But that's the thing here. It's not just you need to be better. It's that you need to get to a certain baseline level of competency at this position. And it's hard to do. There aren't 20 good starting goalies in the NHL, let alone 32, let alone 64, so every team could have a quality backup as well. This is very reminiscent of the conversation we have in the NFL about quarterbacks. There aren't 20 good starters in the league. Maybe the baseline of what an average quarterback is has gotten better over the last 10 years or so because we've made the position easier, we've changed the rules, the offenses are a little bit easier to run, but there aren't 20 guys capable of winning a Super Bowl in the NFL, and there aren't 20 goalies capable of winning the Stanley Cup in the NHL. So with that as our baseline, we're going to pivot, and in our next segment, I'm going to tell you what I think the Oilers are going to do in the offseason and going into next season in regards to the goaltending position coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. In the heart of summer, I'm thinking about 2 things: concerts and baseball. I haven't been to a Met game in a while. Me and my friends are planning on going to one of the Yankee Met games 4th of July weekend next week. But if you are in the market to get to a game, to get to a concert, you have got to check out Game Time. Game Time has made the ticket buying experience so unbelievably easy. Did you know the closer you get to the start of your event, the lower your tickets usually get on Game Time? With things like zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time picks the tickets. My personal favorite component of the Game Time ticket experience is, of course, the panoramic seat view, where in the app, before you buy the tickets, you can click on the individual seat and get the view of the game, of the concert, before you buy them. Because if you're going to a baseball game, you want to be able to see balls and strikes, right? You want to be able to see the ball when it's in play. You don't want to buy tickets in the right field bleachers at Yankee Stadium and not be able to see the ball in the air. You want to be able to see the whole game, and the panoramic seat view gives you the inside scoop. And most importantly, new Game Time customers, when they use the code LOCKEDONNHL, they're going to get $20 off their first purchase. One more time, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are walking through the goalie conundrum. And make no mistake about it, as long as the Oilers fail to change things, this is going to continue being one of the driving, if not the single biggest driving storyline for the comfort level with the team. And obviously McDavid extension, Bouchard extension hold more prescience because the Oilers have never really had a great goalie in the McDavid era. They've gotten okay goalie spurts out of guys like Mike Smith, Mikko Koiskinen, Cam Talbot at various points, but never a real bell cow franchise goalie. And that archetype doesn't really exist anymore. Even the game's best, like Bob, Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, they're not pushing 65 games anymore. They're more in the mid 50s, low 60s, if that. And that's because teams understand they need to be fresh come playoff time. And it's been a while since we've seen a true goalie tandem push for a Stanley Cup Final. There have been instances like Pittsburgh, for example, especially the second time around, where teams have gone back and forth between a goalie on the same team on the way to winning a Stanley Cup. They went back and forth between Matt Murray and Marc-Andre Fleury. We saw Vegas go from Laurent Brossoit to Adin Hill, though Brossoit was an injury thing, not a performance thing. But the Oilers don't have the right mix to pursue that. And you think about the makeup, say, of that Pittsburgh team, where elite forward group, really good team defense, not great individual man-to-man as defensemen, like just in terms of raw talent, but the team overall played pretty good defense. They were able to oscillate back and forth between Fleury and Murray for different reasons, matchups, flow of the game, which everyone was playing better at the given time. And because of that, you think about it in the context of what the expectation was. If they got competent goaltending most of the time, that was enough. But you think about where the league is at, where the Oilers are at right now, and what Pickard and Skinner give them on a consistent basis, it's just not enough. And I'm very regrettably about to say this. I don't think the Oilers are going to upgrade this position in the offseason. I think they are going to try and get everyone to hold their nose, talk themselves into running this back one more time with these two, at least for the start of the regular season, because the options, as we're going to address in our third and final segment, they're not spectacular. And we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show, the idea the Oilers would rather spend the difference between the Skinner-Pickard tandem and a more conventional number one starter on an extra forward. They would rather have Adam Henrique on the team and Skinner and Pickard as opposed to just John Gibson. And you can debate the merits of that. I think it is a market, and it's a roster building inefficiency when you have a lot of guys making a little money, when if you have one guy making a lot of money, generally that guy is going to give you a little more excess value. The superstar contract is the great market inefficiency in the NHL because wages have been depressed for so long, coming out of labor uncertainty and dealing with CBA negotiations, COVID keeping the cap down, cutting revenues, etc. You get what I'm saying here. The value in a great goalie, in that Vasilevsky, that Bobrovsky, Shesterkin, whoever you want to use in your mind, is that he is going to elevate the rest of your team. It's not your team elevates him. It's the inverse of what the Oilers have going on, where because the rest of the team is so good on average, the Oilers can get by with average or slightly below average goaltending most nights. If you dropped a great goalie on this team, you would have to account for that in the way the rest of the roster is built. You would need to spend less on your depth. And of course, the Oilers don't spend a lot on their depth to begin with. Now, look, I understand they're in weird spots with certain contracts, Darnell Nurse, Evander Kane, Victor Arvidsson. That right there alone is almost $20 million just between those three guys. And I think if you gave Stan Bowman the truth serum, he'd tell you he'd like to get rid of all three if he could. And because of that, they have to skimp on goalie. They have allocated their money this way with the very conscious mindset of, if we spend as much as we can on our 18 skaters, and look, we have Connor and Lyon, they make a ton of money, but they're worth it. They outperform their contracts relative to what they would get if you could pay them any amount. Connor and Lyon are very much, $20, $25 million players in a non-salary cap NHL because of how good they are, how much better they are than everyone else. And when you are spending so much on other things, you don't have as much in a salary cap sport on your depth. And you have a lot of guys in your bottom six who are making $1-2 million at the most. You have 3 or 4 of those guys, and you have to go to free agency for the dart throws like Skinner and Arvidsson to say you're a depressed asset, you got bought out, or you're coming off a serious injury, or you're 40 years old. And because of that, you don't command as much on the open market, and we can afford to get you at a better number that works for us. And you're going to play a more specialized role. And if everything works out for everyone, you're going to have a good year here. You'll put up good stats. You will play with really good players, and you will go get paid by someone else because we can't do it. We're paying too much already for Connor, for Lyon, for Darnell Nurse, etc. It's why they probably aren't going to go out and get a goalie as of right now. And look, I personally think it's ridiculous that we're going to go a third year with this as the tandem. I am not saying the options out there are particularly inspiring, exciting, even like moderately appetizing. You are entirely buying lotto tickets on the group of guys we're going to talk about in our next segment in the hopes one of those guys might be slightly above average, and you're going to pay more than you want to. And that's the real pain in the butt about this. Because goalie is such a scarce position, because there aren't even 20 good starters, let alone 32 and another 32 backups, teams end up overpaying in this middle class of goalie that gets to free agency. There's a reason Cam Talbot's still kicking as long as he's been around. He's nothing special, but he gives you a baseline level of competency that most teams are eager to sign up for. That's the caliber of goalie who's going to get to unrestricted free agency most of the time. Other than that, we're talking about dart throws because a lot of these goalies, 27, 28 years old, they don't have a lot of burn on them. They don't have a lot of tread on the tires. And it puts them in a position where you're unproven and teams need to gamble on you. You look at the way Toronto has tried to piece together goalie with Stolars and Jack Campbell and Joseph Wall. You look at the way the Kings have in years past with David Rittich and Cam Talbot and Darcy Kemper, where they've bought low on guys, they've bought low on backups, and they've tried to convert them into starters. Toronto has opted for the full tandem. Carolina has opted to draft a guy in Kochetkov, and they still want to keep bringing Freddie Anderson along, who they feel more confident in, even though he can't stay healthy. And look, this is the hardest position to get right because there aren't enough good ones. We're not talking about third line centers here. Third line centers, you can find something to make work. Second pair defensemen, you can find that. There aren't 20 good goalies in the NHL. And because of that, the Oilers are being very reticent to improve on that position from, even though their tandem is probably like the 24th or 5th best goalie room, they don't want to risk becoming the 27th or 28th by moving on from one of these guys. I think it's a short-sighted way to operate. I don't think it's the best plan, but I do understand it. And that's really the conundrum here. There is no great path if you're the Oilers to improving this position without probably overpaying. And you would rather, if you're Stan Bowman, spend that money or those draft picks on more actively improving of the roster, in improving that second line left wing spot or that third pair left D spot. Unfortunately, this is hard to get right. And coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk about the motley crew of goalie candidates available that the Oilers could pursue, I guess, if that was something you were interested in. Coming up next. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're building wealth. One thing I was definitely guilty of before I started using Monarch, I wasn't saving enough. And using Monarch, I was able to set up a goal, set up that goal, meet that goal, and pay off a vacation in August that I am so looking forward to. If you're looking ready to take control of your finances with Monarch Money, use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year's subscription. Thank you to everyone who's hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of what should be a busy weekend with the draft boiling and the rumor mill abound. And look, everything is always subject to change, but based on the way Stan Bowman was talking about goalies in season, based on the fact there's nobody particularly exciting available in free agency, I don't expect the Oilers to bring a third guy in here. I think Chris Knobloch values the familiarity he has with Pickard and Skinner, the way he's been able to generally get a good feel and pick the right one depending on the situation. But if you were curious, I would suppose the best free agent goalie available in terms of pedigree is Jake Allen. He's a little on the older side at 34. He's coming off a year where he was the backup to Jacob Markstrom with the Devils. He's been a pretty competent tandem goalie, generally more of what I would consider a backup now, a bit more of a better version of what Calvin Pickard brings to the table if you were looking for an archetype. I don't think Jake Allen is going to be at the price point the Oilers are going to be shopping. I think if the Oilers are seriously going to add a goalie that's not a mainline starter, they're going to go to the bargain bin and they're going to try and find their version of Anthony Stolarz. They're going to try and find their version of what Freddie Anderson has been at various points for Carolina, what Antti Raanta was for Carolina at various points, because that low end of the goalie market, the floor is bad. You know, if you want to roll the dice on Vitek Vanacek or Alexander Georgiev, who need to be entirely rebuilt. And that's the thing when you're going to sign a guy who's coming off of a miserable season. Like Georgiev got given up on by the Avalanche in season, went to the Sharks, got his teeth kicked in for 50 games, and was awful, was the worst goalie in the NHL last year. Do you really want to roll the dice on that guy and say, it's your net 35 times to compliment Stuart Skinner, who you don't feel particularly good about it being his net 57 times? It's not great. You know, if you wanted to sell one of these guys, and I've got a few more on the list, the one you could maybe sell me on is Alex Lyon. And Alex Lyon is in that motley crew, that circus clown of a goalie room in Detroit. Alex Lyon has had some okay NHL numbers. He's coming in at 30 years old. His career record is 51, 38, and 11, nothing remarkable. But he has demonstrated some baseline competency at the NHL level. A .902 save percentage is nothing great. His .299 goals against average is horrendous. I think you need to add the context that he's been on some abysmal hockey teams. I think when you take out his small samples, his first 4 years in the NHL, his 2.94 goals against average still isn't particularly enticing. But at the same time, you do need to remember he has spent the last 2 years in Detroit, who play no defense whatsoever, who are entirely an offensive skewed team, who dedicate all of their power to trying to create as much offense as possible because they know they're such a liability defensively. Alex Lyon is the one free agent you might be able to sell me on. And even then, how much more confident are you in Alex Lyon than Stuart Skinner? And if you're not that much more confident, you're not going to give him more starts than Skinner. And if you're looking for a backup, Lyon doesn't want to be a backup. He's been able to get a decent number of starts the last few years. He got 26 this past season. He had 43 the year before. That's not, bell cow stats. That's not 65 starts, but 40 starts, that's not to sneeze at. 25 starts, that's a solid, steady backup. That's one start every other week, one start every week, every back-to-back too. That's a reasonable workload. If you're Alex Lyon, do you want to come here and have to win a spot? And look, I can't speak authoritatively as to whether or not he would need to win a spot and force Pickard to the AHL, but it's not out of the question that the Oilers would do something like that, and that's something you need to account for. What are you offering? Are you offering the chance to seize the starter's role? That if you outplay Skinner, you're going to get the role full time? Are you offering a straight up tandem where we're going to split the starts based on the coach's feel? Is Skinner the starter and am I coming here to be the backup? These are the questions that any goalie that's considering signing with the Oilers need to contend with, because you go and look at the trade market. Maybe John Gibson, Thatcher Demko, the Canucks, I don't think would trade him in the division. And then there are RFAs, Tarasov of the Blue Jackets, Dobyshev of the Habs, and Soderblom of the Blackhawks. Now, if you wanted to tell me the Oilers are going to try and get Soderblom from the Blackhawks, because they traded for Spencer Knight. Remember, the Blackhawks traded for Spencer Knight. They got him in return for Seth Jones in season last year. Spencer Knight is going to be their long-term starter in net. Are the Blackhawks going to keep Soderblom to be the backup until he ages out and then he's a free agent? Are they going to try and trade him for a mid-round draft pick to just get more assets in the coffer? Now, if I were Chicago, I'd hold on to him. You can never have enough goaltending. That's the type of guy you're going to be looking at if the Oilers are seriously considering upgrading. You are talking about a goalie who doesn't have a big sample size, definitely doesn't have a sample size of success, but is an upside gamble. And generally speaking, we don't see teams that consider themselves Stanley Cup contenders going with gambles in net. And that's because, generally speaking, the gamble doesn't pay off. This is the most volatile position in sports. If you had anything in your tank that led your previous team to think you could be a decent goalie, they would have held on to you. It is almost impossible for a truly good goalie to get there. There's a reason Bob might stay the highest paid free agent goalie of all time, because great goalies don't get there. Teams would rather do what Nashville did. They signed Saros to that big extension and traded Askarov when they should have did the other thing around, because they didn't want to roll the dice that Askarov's AHL numbers wouldn't translate. They would rather have the older goalie who has the track record of success, who isn't going to age well, because it's so hard to find even a decent goalie, let alone an actively good one like Saros has been over the years. But with all of that said, that will do it for this episode of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment. Which of the goalies have we talked about that even moderately interests you? I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Until then, let's go Oilers.